Hi everyone, please subscribe my YouTube channel new more videos. My name is Alina Whitmore. I'm 68, a widow, and for most of my life I trusted that family would shield me. I believed the wealth my late husband, Edward, and I amassed would be a source of security in our later years, not a tool wielded against me. On my birthday, my daughter Samantha and her husband Brian urged me to visit our old family cabin in Montana. I wanted to see it as an opportunity to mend the growing rift between us. Instead, it turned into the most harrowing moment of my existence. We gathered around the table, the fireplace crackling louder than I recalled. Brian poured wine, his grin too sharp, his tone too steady. When I stood to stretch, he slipped outside. I heard the grating sound of metal on wood, the distinct clunk of a bolt locking into place. Through the window, Brian's face emerged, bathed in an orange glow. He muttered 4 words that still haunt me. "Hope you enjoy flames." Fire spread rapidly, consuming curtains, licking up the walls. Smoke choked my lungs, each breath slicing like a blade. I pounded the locked door until my hands bled. Samantha stood behind Brian, her face emotionless, her body unmoving. My own daughter, the child I once soothed through sleepless nights, watched me without a flicker of sorrow. The blaze roared, devouring Edward's books, our photos, the memories woven into that cabin. This was no accident, no twist of fate. It was murder cloaked as tragedy. But what they didn't know was that years ago, Edward had revealed a secret hidden in that cabin. "Always have an exit," he'd told me. In the chaos and terror I remembered, they thought I'd turned to ash. Instead, I found my way through the darkness. I didn't burn, I wasn't done. This is where my story starts. A week before my birthday, Samantha called late at night, her voice oddly cheerful, almost scripted. She spoke quickly, saying she and Brian had renovated the Montana cabin and wanted me to celebrate my birthday there. "It'll be special, Mom," she promised. I wavered. That cabin held memories of anniversaries with Edward, of Samantha learning to fish, of laughter filling the rooms. After Edward's passing, I couldn't bear to go back. The memories cut too deep, the silence too heavy. Yet part of me hoped she meant it. Maybe this was her attempt to bridge the years of distance between us. A mother's hope can blind her more than any smoke, so I agreed. The drive was long, winding through pine forests and narrow roads. Brian drove in silence while Samantha chattered about trivial things, a new dress, a friend's vacation to California. She never asked how I was. I noticed the disconnect but told myself to let it go. When we arrived, unease settled over me. The cabin looked familiar yet altered. The porch gleamed with fresh paint, the windows sparkled, the steps felt sturdier. It seemed staged, like a picture of a home rather than a home itself. Inside, the table was set with fine china I hadn't seen in years. Candles glowed in the corners, casting shadows that flickered across the walls. Samantha handed me a silver locket as a birthday gift. It was beautiful but empty, no photo, no inscription, just a hollow shell. I smiled politely, though my heart felt heavy. I told myself it was a gesture, a step toward closeness. What I didn't realize was that the invitation wasn't about reconciliation. It was a lure. I had already walked into their trap. Dinner began with a silence heavier than the mountain air. The table held roasted chicken, wine, and candlelight. It looked like a celebration, but something felt off. Brian poured the wine, setting my glass down with deliberate care. I took a sip and tasted something bitter, sharp, and strange. I forced a smile but pushed the glass aside. Samantha avoided my gaze, speaking in a flat tone about meaningless topics. Her words sounded like lines from a script she no longer believed. As the night went on, the cabin grew unnaturally warm. The fire in the hearth snapped louder, sparks jumping higher. I stood to open a window, but the latch wouldn't move. Brian excused himself and stepped outside. Moments later, I heard the scrape of metal on wood. When I turned, I saw it in Samantha's face. She knew. She sat stiffly, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes glistening but her body still. Through the window, Brian's silhouette loomed against a growing glow. His smile was calm, almost kind, as if what he was doing was routine. He leaned close, his voice carrying through a crack in the glass. "Hope you enjoy flames." The bolt locked shut. The room became a prison. Flames surged faster than I could process. Curtains crumbled to ash, heat swept across the floorboards, smoke tore at my throat. I hammered the door with all my strength, but it wouldn't budge. I looked at Samantha one last time. My daughter, the child I once sang to sleep, sat frozen, her silence louder than Brian's threat. The trap had ignited, and it was meant to destroy me. The flames closed in with terrifying speed. Smoke thickened until each breath felt like swallowing shards of glass. My eyes stung, my skin burned, and the cabin that once held our happiest summers now threatened to be my tomb. In that chaos, Edward's voice echoed in my mind, as clear as the day he spoke it. "Always have an exit." Years before, he'd shown me a secret, a safeguard built into the cabin. I'd laughed at his caution then, but now those words were my lifeline. I staggered toward the far wall, coughing as the fire roared behind me. Books charred, photos curled into ash, but I kept moving. Behind a bookshelf, hidden under layers of dust, was the small trapdoor Edward had crafted. My hands trembled as I pried it open. The tunnel below was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through. Smoke trailed me, clinging to my hair and clothes, but the cool earth dulled the searing air. I dragged myself forward on my elbows, lungs burning for relief. Above, the cabin groaned as beams collapsed, each crash a reminder of how close the flames had come. My body ached, my arms raw from splinters, but I pushed on inch by inch. Finally, the tunnel opened into the forest. I collapsed into the snow, gasping, my skin coated in soot. The cold stung, but it was the sweetest pain I'd ever felt. Behind me, the fire consumed the cabin, leaving only an orange glow in the sky. They thought I was gone, reduced to cinders in the wreckage. But I was alive, and survival meant a chance to fight back. I stumbled through the trees until dawn began to break. Every step was torture, my legs trembling, my lungs raw from smoke, but I refused to stop. Beyond the highway lived my oldest friend, Ruth, the only person I knew I could trust. She'd been there when Samantha was born, when Edward and I built our company, when grief hollowed me after his death. If anyone could help, it was her. When I reached her door, I could barely lift my hand to knock. Ruth opened it and froze, staring at me, covered in ash, hair tangled, eyes red from smoke. "Eleanor," she whispered, as if saying my name might make me disappear. Then she pulled me inside without another word. Wrapped in a blanket, I told her everything. The invitation, the dinner, Brian's whisper, Samantha's silence. Ruth's face shifted from shock to rage, her jaw set. "You're not imagining this," she said firmly. "They tried to kill you. Now we make sure they can't try again." She picked up the phone and called a private investigator she trusted, Max Carter. By evening, Max sat across from me at Ruth's kitchen table. He was calm, precise, asking for every detail I could remember. "This wasn't spontaneous," he said after listening. "This was calculated. That means there's a trail, documents, signatures, accounts. We find that we have evidence." His confidence steadied me. For the first time since the fire, I felt a spark of strength return. Ruth poured tea, her hand resting on mine. "You survived the fire, Eleanor. Now you survived the truth. We'll face it together." That night, lying in Ruth's guest room, I stared at the ceiling and whispered Edward's words. "Always have an exit." I'd found mine, and now I was determined to uncover theirs. Max moved quickly. The next evening he drove me to Portland, where Samantha and Brian lived. Ruth stayed behind, ready to contact Melissa Hale, a federal agent Max trusted if we found something solid. We parked a block away, waiting until their house went dark. With practiced ease, Max led us through a side door. My heart pounded louder than my footsteps, every shadow a reminder of betrayal. The study inside looked too orderly, almost staged. Max's instincts urged him to dig deeper. He opened drawers, checked behind frames, and finally pulled out a folder tucked under the desk. In bold letters, it read, "Estate transfer." Inside were papers that turned my stomach, property deeds with my forged signature, power of attorney forms I'd never seen, even a draft death certificate with my name neatly typed. My legs weakened. They'd been planning my erasure long before the cabin. Then Max found a USB drive taped to the folder's back. He plugged it into his encrypted laptop, and the screen lit up with audio files. We listened. Samantha's voice, shaky but practiced, said, "My mom was so lonely after Dad died. She always said the cabin was where she wanted to rest." Then Brian's voice, calm and directive, "Slower, add more grief. They need to believe you." Hearing my daughter rehearse my death broke something inside me, but it also gave us what we needed, proof. At the back of the folder was a list of names. Dr. Raymond Holt, attorney Patricia Long, financial manager Paul Dennison, each with dollar amounts beside them. Max leaned in. "This isn't just them," he said. "This is a network. Your daughter and son-in-law are just parts of it." I closed the folder with shaking hands. Now we would expose them all. For the first time, I didn't feel like prey. I felt like a witness ready to testify. We couldn't wait long. Melissa Hale, the federal agent Ruth contacted, helped plan the next step. If Samantha and Brian thought I was dead, they'd move quickly to claim the estate. But if they saw me alive, the shock might unravel them. So I returned to my Denver home, the house Edward and I had built. Hidden microphones were placed in the living room, cameras tucked where photos once hung. I sat in Edward's leather chair, where he used to read the morning paper, and waited. When Samantha and Brian walked in, their faces paled. Brian froze at the doorway, his hand gripping the knob. Samantha's lips parted, but no sound came. "Looking for a ghost?" I asked, my voice steady. Brian's composure cracked. "This isn't possible," he snapped. "You were gone." I reached for the recorder on the table and pressed play. Brian's voice filled the room, cold and clear. "Hope you enjoy Flames." The silence that followed was heavier than smoke. Samantha sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. Brian clenched his fists, anger rising. "You think anyone will believe you? We had everything set, papers, doctors, lawyers. You were already dead." His words cut deep, each one caught by the microphones. I slid the folder of forged documents toward Samantha, her eyes locked on the signatures, proof of her betrayal. "I'm not ashes," I said. "I'm evidence." For the first time since the fire, I saw fear in Brian's eyes, not of flames, but of a truth he couldn't control. The silence broke with footsteps in the hall. Melissa Hale entered, flanked by two federal agents, shifting the room's air instantly. Brian's defiance wavered. Samantha's sobs grew louder. Melissa's voice was calm but firm. "Thank you, Mr. Warren." That was the confession we needed. Brian's head whipped toward her, eyes wild. "You don't get it," he spat. "We weren't the first and we won't be the last. Families line up for this." "They wanted it." Melissa raised an eyebrow, her face unreadable. "And now you've just confirmed there's more. Every word you say is evidence." The agents moved quickly. One sealed the forged documents in an evidence bag. Another pressed Brian against the wall, reading his rights as he shouted into the floor. Samantha didn't resist. She curled into herself, trembling, hands covering her face. I looked at her, my voice softer than I expected. You chose silence when I begged for help. Silence was your weapon, but it can't shield you now. Melissa nodded slightly, signaling it was enough. The agents led Brian and Samantha out, their figures shrinking under the weight of justice. When the house grew quiet, I rested my hand on Edward's chair. The leather felt warm, a reminder of our shared mornings. I whispered into the stillness, "The fire didn't end me. It lit the path to truth." For the first time since the cabin, the smoke in my chest began to clear. The ashes hadn't buried me, they'd paved the way for justice. The courthouse was colder than I expected, its marble halls echoing with footsteps and murmurs. Reporters crowded the entrance, cameras flashing, but I held my head high. This wasn't just about me, it was about every life their scheme had touched. Inside, I sat quietly as the charges were read. Attempted murder, conspiracy, forgery, financial exploitation of the elderly. Each word hit like a gavel, sharp and final. Samantha and Brian sat at the defense table. Brian's jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the jurors for any hint of sympathy. Samantha, dressed in black, looked pale, her shoulders slumped. She seemed less like my daughter and more like a stranger. The prosecution presented the evidence. Forged documents with my false signature, a death certificate drafted before my supposed death, the USB recordings of Samantha practicing grief, Brian coaching her, and the audio from my living room. Hope you enjoy Flames. The jury listened in silence, their faces growing stern with every word. The defense argued stress, confusion, even manipulation, but the evidence was ironclad. Every document, every recording painted a clear picture. This was intentional. When my turn came, I didn't give a long speech. I walked to the stand, gripped the rail, and looked each juror in the eye. "I'm not ashes," I said quietly. "I'm evidence." Those words carried more weight than any testimony I could have given. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman stood, voice steady, "Guilty on all counts." The gavel struck, final and clear. Samantha wept into her hands. Brian's shoulders slumped as his anger faded into defeat. I didn't smile or celebrate. I simply breathed, knowing the truth had been heard and justice had prevailed. Months later, I returned to the mountains where the cabin once stood. Only charred beams remained, but I knew it wouldn't end in ruins. With help from Ruth, Melissa, and others who believed in new beginnings, we rebuilt it into something new. We called it Haven House. It wasn't just for me, it became a sanctuary for women like me, widows, mothers, grandmothers betrayed by the families they trusted. Here they found warmth instead of flames, voices instead of silence. We shared meals, stories, and healing. The walls echoed with resilience, not greed. I often sat on the porch, lavender swaying in the breeze, its scent mingling with pine. Children of the women who found refuge here played in the yard, their laughter a promise of a kinder future. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Inside was a drawing from a young girl whose grandmother had stayed at Haven House. It showed a small cabin, smoke rising gently from the chimney, not flames. Two figures stood outside, holding hands. Above them were the words, "Thank you. Because of you, I still have her." Tears blurred the colors, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of survival, of purpose. The fire meant to erase me had sparked a new beginning. I wasn't ashes. I was a witness, a survivor, a guardian for others. To those listening, remember this. Flames can burn walls, but they can't erase memory. Betrayal may cut deep, but truth will always find its voice. If my story moved you, share it. Leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and subscribe. Stories live when we pass them on, and no voice, no matter how silenced, is ever truly lost.